Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we are going to be kind of getting into some maybe complex stuff,
Yeah.
but really interesting stuff, I think. We're going to be looking at the Enneagram and psychopathology.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, kind of the shadow sides of each type. And we're going to be looking at this through the lens of Antonio Fernandez Guerrero, who is
Okay.
a psychologist who has done some really interesting work in this area. He has a YouTube channel if you want to check that out.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's done some really in-depth analysis of the correlation between these two things.
That's pretty fascinating because the Enneagram, I mean, I think most people kind of have an idea of what it is, like 9 types, interconnected personality types. There's motivations, fears, and behaviors.
Exactly.
But to connect that with psychopathology, that's
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
And it's important, I think, right off the bat to say
Yeah.
that we're not trying to diagnose anyone here. This is
Well.
not a clinical tool.
No.
This is more for self-awareness
Yeah.
and understanding some of this potential, maybe less healthy manifestations.
Yeah, and to be clear, like these are extreme cases that we're talking about.
Right.
So it's not to say that if you're a certain type, you're automatically going to have these issues. But it's just kind of looking at like what could happen if these things get really amplified.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start, I guess, with type 9, the peacemaker.
Okay.
Guerrero suggests a potential correlation with Stockholm Syndrome in extreme cases.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. So you're saying that nines...
I mean, it's not
Yeah.
it's not literal.
Not literally kidnapped.
Right. It's not like you're literally being held hostage.
Right.
But there's this idea
Yeah.
of maybe a psychological captivity
That makes sense.
where, the core fear of conflict and the desire for harmony can lead to a sort of, like you said, not a literal, but a kind of giving over of yourself.
Almost like a fear of rocking the boat
Exactly.
to the point where you kind of just go along with whatever's happening, even if it's unhealthy for you.
Yes. And he also links type 9 to what he calls narcotization.
Narcotization.
And that's using substances or activities that suppress the central nervous system.
Okay.
So it's like a way to numb out
Got it.
and avoid that inner turmoil.
Interesting. So it's like they're seeking peace
Yeah,
externally because they can't find it internally.
exactly. It's like
Yeah.
an external rather than an internal
Makes sense.
seeking of peace.
He also observed a pattern of what he calls defensive extroversion
Yes.
in some nines. It's not true extroversion, he says,
Right.
but rather a constant busyness and outward focus as a way to avoid confronting their inner world.
Exactly. So it's like
Wow.
they're running from themselves
Yeah.
by constantly engaging with the external world.
Wow, I've never thought of it that way. That's
It's kind of a...
fascinating.
Yeah.
So they're not really seeking social connection. It's more like a distraction technique.
Yes. Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so that's a lot to consider with the 9. What about type 1, the reformer?
Yeah. So Guerrero sees a strong connection here
Okay.
to obsessive compulsive disorder,
OCD.
particularly in the conservation subtype.
Now, when you think about the subtypes, the conservation subtype is so focused on
Right.
structure, order, and self-control. I can see how easily that could amplify
Yeah.
into an obsessive need for perfection and control,
Exactly.
leading to, anxieties and rituals that we associate with OCD.
He even mentions Jack Nicholson's character in As Good as It Gets.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of an example.
Right, but that's definitely more of a caricature.
Of course, it's a caricature, but
Yeah.
but it does illustrate that point.
It does illustrate that rigidity and the need to control their environment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to type 2, the helper.
Okay, the helper.
Some of the shadow sides here that he points to are histrionic personality disorder
Okay.
and dependent personality disorder.
Now, this is particularly in the sexual subtype, he says.
Yes, particularly in the sexual subtype.
And that's interesting because you think about that need to be needed,
Right.
the fear of being unloved or abandoned.
Yes.
It makes sense that in an unhealthy 2, that could manifest as needing a lot of attention and validation,
Yes.
maybe even behaving dramatically or seductively.
Yeah, it's like
Interesting.
the helping becomes less about genuine care
Right.
and more about getting their own needs met.
Yeah. It's a very self-serving kind of helping.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then that fear of abandonment can lead to just really clinging to relationships.
Yes, even unhealthy ones.
Even unhealthy ones.
So it's creating a cycle of dependency.
It's a cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. How about type 3, the achiever?
The achiever.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we're looking at narcissistic personality disorder,
Yes.
particularly the artist subtype.
Okay.
And it's driven by that core desire for success and admiration.
Right.
So imagine a 3 whose pursuit of achievement becomes so all-consuming
Yeah.
that it turns into this grandiose sense of self-importance
Right.
and needing constant validation. Yes.
Yeah.
And then there's also this tendency towards hysteria in some 3s,
Oh, yes. Particularly those in the social subtype.
especially the social subtype. Yeah.
It's like when they face setbacks or if their image is threatened.
Right.
It's like this carefully crafted persona starts to crumble,
Yes.
and they might lash out or become manipulative to regain control.
Yes. It's like a very
Yeah.
fragile sense of self.
Yeah.
Even though they're projecting this image of confidence and success.
Right.
And even in healthy 3s, there can be this element of Machiavellianism,
Machiavellianism.
like a willingness to use manipulative tactics to achieve their goals.
Wow. So that whole the ends justify the means.
Yes.
Yeah.
But again, it's not
Not all 3s are like this. It's
Yeah.
just understanding that potential pitfall.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Type 4, the individualist. This one's complex.
This one is very complex. He draws a lot of connections here.
Yeah.
One is to borderline personality disorder,
Okay.
particularly in the sexual subtype again.
Interesting. And, when you consider the 4's core fears, feeling flawed or insignificant,
Yes.
abandonment,
Yeah.
that fear of being flawed or insignificant.
It makes sense that in an unhealthy expression, this can lead to unstable relationships,
Yes.
fear of rejection, difficulty regulating emotions.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there's the connection to schizotypal personality disorder,
Oh, yeah.
because of their tendency towards unconventionality,
Right.
intense emotions.
They tend to have those eccentric beliefs and experiences.
Yes.
Which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah. And then, of course, the melancholy and the depression.
Right. Especially the social subtype. That deep longing for connection.
Yes.
Sense of belonging.
But that fear of being seen as flawed or unworthy.
Right.
Yeah.
And it can lead to withdrawal and a feeling of emptiness.
Yeah. And because of their intense emotional fluctuations, he even connects them to bipolar disorder.
He does. But to be clear, he's referring to the cyclical nature of their emotions. Cyclothemia.
Yes. Not necessarily a clinical diagnosis.
Right. It's just that intensity.
It's up and down.
The highs and lows. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Wow. That was a lot.
That was a lot for the 4.
Type 5.
Okay. 5,
The investigator.
the investigator. What are we seeing here?
So one of the first things is schizoid personality disorder,
Okay.
particularly in the conservation subtype,
Okay.
which emphasizes self-sufficiency withdrawal from the world.
Right.
And in unhealthy 5s, this can lead to extreme isolation,
Yes.
lack of interest in social connection.
So it's taking that love of solitude
Right.
to kind of an extreme.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he also mentions schizotypal personality disorder.
Yes.
But this time in 5s with a 4 wing.
Right.
Right.
So it's interesting how those two can kind of
They connect there.
connect. Yeah. And then he also brings up autism and Asperger's.
Right. And he even uses Sheldon Cooper as an example.
Right.
But of course,
It's a...
Sheldon's a caricature,
Yes.
not a real person,
Right. It's a TV show.
but it does
Illustrate some of the tendencies.
illustrate that social awkwardness and
Right.
the love of routine and structure.
Exactly.
Yeah. And in extreme cases,
Yeah.
he even mentions savant syndrome
Wow.
with 5s. So,
So there's this potential for brilliance,
yeah,
but also isolation.
yeah. Okay. Type 6, the loyalist.
The loyalist. What are we seeing here?
So with 6s, it's all about that fear of insecurity,
Right.
the need for security and support.
Yes.
And when those fears get amplified, it can manifest as generalized anxiety disorder.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Always scanning for threats.
Right.
Trying to anticipate what could go wrong.
Exactly. And he mentions different kinds of phobias,
What kind?
like social anxiety, fear of social situations,
Okay.
xenophobia, fear of strangers or foreigners.
Right. So all rooted in that feeling of being unsafe. Exactly. And then there's the potential for fanaticism,
Yes,
Right.
particularly in the social subtype.
especially in the social subtype. Yeah. And he even uses Adolf Eichmann as an example. Someone who exhibited unquestioning loyalty to authority.
That's a chilling example.
It is.
It really shows how important it is for 6s
Right.
to develop critical thinking skills
Absolutely.
and to question authority.
Yeah. Blind obedience is never healthy no matter what type you are.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, type 7, the enthusiast.
You're enthusiast. Okay.
Right.
What are we seeing here?
So there are some narcissistic tendencies in 7s,
Right.
particularly in the artist subtype.
Okay.
And it's that desire to be the center of attention to accumulate experiences.
Yeah.
But in an unhealthy 7, this can lead to a grandiose sense of self-importance,
Right.
lack of empathy for others.
So it's like their enthusiasm kind of takes a dark turn.
Yeah, it becomes all about them.
Yeah. And then there's the potential for addiction.
Addiction. Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Which makes sense.
Because they need that constant stimulation.
Yeah.
They want to avoid pain or boredom.
What kinds of addictions does he mention?
He talks about stimulants,
Okay.
things that give you that quick burst of energy.
Right. But also behavioral addictions.
Like what?
Workaholism.
Okay.
Shopping thrill-seeking.
So it's not just substances.
It's anything that becomes compulsive.
Right.
A way to escape discomfort.
Yeah.
And he also suggests that some 7 children might be misdiagnosed with ADHD.
Interesting.
Because they have that natural energy level,
Right.
that enthusiasm.
And he even mentions Leonardo da Vinci as a potential example
Right.
of someone who might have exhibited ADHD traits.
And he highlights that ADHD is a spectrum.
Yes.
So it can manifest in many different ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, finally, type 8, the challenger.
The challenger.
Intensity assertiveness.
Yeah, so here we're looking at a potential correlation with grandiose narcissistic personality disorder.
Okay.
He even cites Donald Trump as a possible example of the sexual subtype.
Okay.
So it's that need for power and control,
Right.
which in an unhealthy feat can become a sense of entitlement, lack of empathy.
They might exploit others
Exactly.
to get what they want.
And he also mentions histrionic tendencies.
Yes.
Especially in the sexual subtype.
Right.
It's about using their charisma and intensity to dominate.
Yeah.
And in really extreme cases, he even suggests antisocial personality disorder
Okay.
and psychopathy.
Wow.
And then there's the potential for domestic violence.
Yes.
Particularly in unhealthy sexual 8s.
It's a
It's a difficult topic.
Yeah.
But it's important to address.
To acknowledge it.
Yes, because it's about understanding how that need for control can become destructive.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this has been a fascinating look at
It is fascinating.
the shadow side
Yeah.
of each type.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that this is a lot of information.
Yeah.
It might feel a little overwhelming.
Right.
But again,
Yeah.
this is not about diagnosing yourself or anyone else.
No.
It's just about understanding these potential correlations.
Exactly.
And not about deterministic outcomes.
Right.
Just because you're a certain type doesn't mean you're
doomed.
you're doomed. Exactly. So with that in mind,
Yeah.
let's take a breath.
Okay.
And then we'll move on to
Yeah.
the next part of this deep dive.
Okay. It's fascinating to me how each type's core fears and motivations, connect to these potential disorders in a logical way.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's like a domino effect. You can
Yeah.
see how the fears can just escalate and manifest
Yeah.
in these really extreme ways.
Like take the 6, for example.
Always seeking security, reassurance.
Right. In a healthy 6, that translates to loyalty, responsibility, preparedness.
Mm-hmm.
But when those fears get amplified, it can lead to that hypervigilance and anxiety you see in generalized anxiety disorder.
And their need to feel safe can lead them to just latch onto these external structures.
Authorities.
Yeah, even if they're harmful
Right.
or restrictive.
It's that shadow side of blind obedience.
Yeah.
Potential for fanaticism we talked about.
So it's almost like a perversion of their natural desire
Right.
for security,
Exactly. And you see a similar dynamic with the 2.
driven by that need to be loved and needed.
Yes. A healthy 2 expresses that through genuine care, generosity. But when that need gets distorted, it can lead to those clingy, dependent behaviors we see in dependent personality disorder.
And their fear of being unloved can drive them to seek attention and validation in these really unhealthy ways.
Leading to those dramatic or seductive patterns of histrionic personality disorder.
Exactly. So it's not that the core motivations themselves are bad.
Right.
It's just how they can become
Twisted.
exaggerated
Yeah.
and lead to these more problematic expressions.
Like a spectrum with
Yeah.
healthy expression on one end and these more extreme manifestations on the other.
And where you fall on that spectrum depends on a lot of different things.
Yeah, your level of self-awareness, coping mechanisms, environment.
So this raises an important question for me. If the Enneagram can illuminate these potential shadow sides, how can we use that knowledge to actually become more balanced and whole?
I think it starts with recognizing that we all have these shadow sides.
We do.
Nobody's exempt.
It's not about denying them or
Or-
suppressing them.
It's about bringing them into the light of awareness.
Yeah.
Once you understand your own tendencies, your triggers, your patterns, you can start to make conscious choices.
So it's like holding up a mirror to yourself and saying, okay, I see this. I acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And now I have a choice
You have a choice.
about how I engage with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the Enneagram can be a really powerful tool for that kind of self-reflection.
It can help you identify those areas where you might be prone to getting stuck,
Yeah.
where your fears might be driving your behavior in ways that you're not even aware of.
Right. And it can also help you to develop strategies for moving through those challenges.
So, for example, one who struggles with perfectionism
Yeah.
might learn to practice self-compassion.
Acceptance.
A 7 who's prone to escapism might focus on developing mindfulness practices
To stay present.
to stay present with those difficult emotions.
It's not just about understanding your type.
Right.
It's about using that understanding to develop healthier habits and coping skills.
And it's not a solo journey. Having a therapist or a trusted friend
A mentor.
who understands the Enneagram can be so helpful.
It's like having a guide
Yes.
to help you navigate that terrain.
With their own psyche.
Exactly. And remember, the goal isn't to eliminate these shadow sides completely.
You can't.
That's not realistic.
And it's not even desirable.
Because even our shadow sides can have positive qualities.
They can.
An 8's intensity can make them powerful leaders. A 4's emotional depth can make them incredible artists.
It's about integrating those aspects of ourselves in a way that serves both us and the world.
Finding that balance between light and shadow.
Strengths and vulnerabilities.
Exactly. Embracing the fullness of who we are.
That's where the real growth happens.
Yeah.
We can accept and integrate all parts of ourselves.
Absolutely. It's a lifelong journey,
It is.
but it's worth taking.
So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, wow, this is a lot,
Yeah.
I want to encourage you to just approach this information with curiosity.
Yeah, compassion.
Don't judge yourself or others based on these correlations.
Instead, use this knowledge as a starting point for exploration.
Ask yourself, what resonates with me?
Yeah.
What do I need to learn more about?
What can I learn from this?
How can I use this to grow and evolve?
That's great advice. And if you are struggling with any of these issues, please reach out for professional help.
There's no shame in asking for help.
There's strength in recognizing when you need it.
Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about how this understanding of the Enneagram shadow side can impact our relationships with others.
Oh, that's a crucial piece. Because we don't exist in isolation.
We don't.
We're constantly interacting
With other people.
who all have their own Enneagram types and challenges.
So how can this knowledge help us to navigate those relationships with more awareness and compassion?
Well, I think it starts with just recognizing that other people have shadow sides too.
Right, just like we do.
It's not just us.
Everyone has their own fears and insecurities and blind spots.
Sure.
And those things can show up in their behavior in ways that can be, hurtful or challenging.
Right. The key is to try not to take it personally.
Oh, that's so much easier said than done.
It is. It is. But if you can remember that the other person might be acting from their own woundedness,
Okay.
it creates space for compassion.
So instead of getting defensive or reactive, we can try to see their behavior through the lens of their Enneagram type.
Yeah. For example, if you're dealing with an 8 who's being really domineering or controlling,
Okay.
it might help to remember that their behavior is probably rooted in a fear of vulnerability
Right.
and a need to feel in control.
It doesn't excuse the behavior, but it helps you to make sense of it.
Exactly. And it can help you to set boundaries and communicate your needs more effectively.
Because you kind of understand where they're coming from.
Right. And you can approach the situation with empathy and less judgment.
So it's like having the secret decoder ring
Yeah.
for understanding human behavior.
In a way, yeah, the Enneagram can help you to decipher those underlying motivations and feels that are driving people's actions.
And that can be so valuable in any relationship, whether it's with a partner, family member, coworker.
Stranger on the street,
Yeah.
it can just help you to be more patient, more forgiving
More skillful.
in your interactions.
Because you're not just reacting to that surface behavior.
you're seeing the person beneath the mask.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that deeper understanding can foster a sense of connection
Yeah.
and compassion.
That goes beyond the challenges of everyday life.
This has been such an illuminating conversation.
Yeah.
I feel like I've learned so much about myself and others
That's great.
through this exploration of the Enneagram's shadow side.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, this is just the beginning.
It is.
The more you explore the Enneagram, the more you'll discover about yourself and the people around you.
So to our listener,
Yeah.
we encourage you to continue this journey of self-discovery.
Keep exploring.
Explore the Enneagram. Reflect on your own tendencies.
and just observe how these patterns play out in your relationships.
And remember, it's not about being perfect.
No.
It's about embracing the fullness of who you are.
Shadows and all.
Because it's in that integration of our light and dark sides
Yes.
that we find our true potential.
It's for growth.
For growth, healing, connection.
Beautifully said.
And on that note,
Yeah.
we'll leave you with this thought to ponder.
Okay.
How can understanding the shadow side of the Enneagram empower you to create more fulfilling and compassionate relationships in your own life?
That's a great question.
Until next time, keep diving deep